Welcome to episode 42 of The Expert and the Idiot. Today I'm talking to Paul Duren. Today we're going to be talking about maternal incubation, your experience with a mite infestation. What else do you want to talk about? I know that you... What is your background? Because I know that you're always talking about like scientific papers and everything. Is that just like an interest that you have, looking up papers related to reptile, keeping and husbandry and just reptiles in general?
Yeah, I'm not a scientist. I thought I was going to do a science major in college and then discovered like how hard science actually is. Yeah, I thought I was smart, but... So I pivoted to environmental education instead. But I've always had like sort of a layperson interest in science, I guess. So I've never actually done any of it, but I just think that's how I tend to think. Those are the lenses that I use to view the world.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if that answers the question, but
environmental, what was it? I'm sorry.
Environmental education.
Okay. So what is that?
Well, it didn't wind up being what I did for my career, but basically it's the kind of job or kind of degree that you would have if you were going to be like a park ranger or running a nature center or doing communications for a zoo or a conservation program or that kind of thing. Okay. And honestly, none of those sounded great to me as a job. I think those are all amazing jobs. They just weren't going to be a good fit for me when I was 23.
Sure.
So basically I spent my career building houses. And I took my interest in environmentalism and conservation into doing green construction and tried to contribute environmentally that way.
Okay. Now, what got you into reptiles? When did that start?
I had a redfoot tortoise and an anole as a kid, and that ended tragically, as most of those childhood experiences do from the 70s. And then I always just thought they were super cool. But my kid brought home a couple of garter snakes from his high school. Mm-hmm. He was the one who was caring for them on school vacations and so forth. And he eventually wound up taking over their care and just taking them from the school because they weren't being cared for all that well when they weren't at our house. And I just totally fell in love with them. A couple of cohabbed garter snakes. They were amazing. They were such little monsters, just tons of personality. They were hilarious. Super underrated in the hobby. And then, you know how that goes, right? Like you have one or two snakes, and if you're into it, then one thing leads to another, and pretty soon you're breeding scrub pythons.
Yeah. So how did you make the jump from garter snakes to scrub pythons? Because they seem like they're kind of different animals.
Size-wise, they're different. Although, in some ways, they're not that different. I would say that they're not that different behaviorally because they're both actually pretty intense. And when they're on, right? So, like, you can learn a lot by having garter snakes. You can really learn a lot. But it took me a while of keeping a few different species to decide what I really liked. And so I have a couple of, I don't have those garters anymore. But I have a couple of medium-sized snakes. I have I only have 4 snakes on a permanent basis, right? Like I've got a Mexican pine snake. I've got a super dwarf retic, and then I've got the pair of scrubs here and here. So basically, it was just each time I got a new animal, it would sort of inform me about like, okay, what is it I like about this, and what really speaks to me about it. What do I not like? What would I change? And so that I'm sorry, I'm losing my train of thought.
That's all right.
But yeah, so basically, the retic convinced me. Oh, I really like these active, smart pythons.
Yeah.
And when I was first shopping for a retic, people would tell me, "Oh, like a 10-foot retic's not that big of a deal." I'm like, what are you talking about? That sounds crazy.
Yeah.
Like, I do not want a 10-foot snake. That sounds just completely bonkers. I want to have the tiniest possible little teeny weeny retic that I can possibly get. And then over a few years of keeping him, I realized that, that actually I could see how a 10-foot retic, if it has a good temperament, it's well socialized and kept well and all of that stuff. I wouldn't say that it's not a big deal, but it seemed a lot more attainable and manageable.
Yeah.
But then just to do something different, and because just visually the scrubs really spoke to me, then I decided to pursue them instead of retics. And I like this. I like the scrub community a lot. The people who keep them tend to be. You don't keep them if you're not really into them, right?
Yeah.
So I appreciate that a lot too.
Nobody's trying to get rich on scrub pythons.
People might try, but it'd be a tough.
Yeah.
It's not a business plan I'd recommend.
Yeah. So you got into the scrubs after the retic, and how old is your retic now, and about how large is he?
He's 3 years old, and he's tiny. He's just over 4.5 feet. He weighs like 430 grams, something like that.
That's bananas.
I mean, you know how Garrett Hartle always says, "Oh, they don't get much bigger than a corn snake." He really is. He's the size of a corn snake.
Jeez, that's crazy.
Yeah, I mean, he'll still get a lot bigger, I think, but I think he's going to stay really on the small end of the scale.
Okay.
Shout out to Eric Lee.
That's
Eric produced him, and
nice.
He's fantastic. I just love that snake. He's got so much personality. He's super fun, really bold, socialized really well, amazing with target training. He's fantastic.
Nice. Now, do you plan on keeping your collection on the smaller side? That way you can maintain that relationship with your animals the way that you do?
Yeah. I mean, that's really important to me. I understand people who have a ton of snakes. And when I first started getting into it, I really felt that like, oh, I want to have like 30 or 40 snakes or, something like that. And now that's, that I find that almost hard to imagine.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, I guess it's a different type of keeping. But I really enjoy that, like really granular knowledge of what each of the animals is up to, what they're about, and it makes it really easy to do close observation. And also, I've got more flexibility in what I can offer them. If I were really constrained on enclosure size or something like that, I'd wind up with basically sooner or later, I'd wind up with snakes that are in enclosures that are too small and aren't getting the kind of enrichment that I want to be able to give them. So by just having a handful of them, I'm probably going to keep two, or my son is going to keep two of the scrub babies that I have. But I don't see having a larger, significantly larger connection at any point. I would totally love to. I mean, there's all sorts of snakes that I just, I would absolutely love to have. And I think they're completely amazing, but that's not the type of experience that I'm going for.
Now, what kind of scrub did you end up getting, and what made you choose that type of scrub?
There's Somalia amethystina, which is the southern scrub. I mean, you probably know the taxonomy of scrubs is kind of a mess. So these are a species that they're found in a lot of Papua, as well as parts of Northern Australia, but the Northern Australia ones get a lot bigger than the Papuan ones, and although the Papuan ones still can get quite large, but so these are from a locality called Tanamera, and they're they're 7 years old, and they're both about just under 10 feet long, something like that, and it seems like they probably won't grow a whole lot more. I mean, they'll grow a little bit, but maybe another couple feet, something like that. But the male weighs, what does he weigh? 2,200 grams, something like that. He can, his hide, when I had him in quarantine, his hide was a women's size 7 shoebox, 10-foot snake.
That is wild.
Yeah.
Now, and what size enclosures do you keep them in?
So these two enclosures here, I built them. They're 7 long, 2.5 feet deep, and 3.5 feet tall each. Nice. And then there's a pass through between them that I can. That's been closed off.
So when you got them, was your intent to breed them, or was it just you wanted to keep them, or how did you get to the point of breeding?
My intent with getting them was I was open to breeding them, and I knew that they had mated in the past, but they hadn't. She'd never become gravid, and I basically my goal with having them was to keep them as naturalistically as possible and let them do all of their scrubby things that they would normally do in life. And if mating and reproducing was part of that, then cool. And if it wasn't, that was also fine. So it wasn't like, oh, I really want to produce these babies and I really want to sell them, and I'm going to become a snake breeder or anything like that. It was much more, I just wanted to keep them naturalistically, and if breeding was in the cards, then cool. Yeah.
So when did you make the choice to breed, and what was that process like?
Well, they had been cohabbed off and on for most of the year prior to me having them, and they had mated during that time, like I said. But so basically, I built these enclosures with the pass through, and the idea that that they would be allowed access to each other as long as they behaved, and then I would just sort of let them. Again, it was like the through line to the whole story is hands off, basically, and so once I had them in these enclosures and they had sort of settled in, I just opened it up between the two of them. And that was February of 2024. Mm-hmm. And within very quickly, within a week or two, they were locked up. So wow. I think I just sort of got lucky with the timing and the cycle. I didn't do any kind of special cycle feeding, anything like that. I mean, the people who had them before me had gotten, especially the female, she was in really, really good body condition. To me, I was worried that she was too fat, but then the couple of breeders who I talked to, and particularly Stephen Cush, who I know he was like, no, she's perfect, dude. She was totally perfect. They had mated during the season or during the calendar year at all sorts of different times of year. Mm-hmm. So I don't know what flipped her into ovulating. If I just happened to open that pass through a few weeks before she was ready to ovulate, or if there was something that in their environment that tipped her over the edge into actually cycling. I don't know.
Wow. So you basically just gave them the opportunity and that was it.
Yep.
And when did you find out that she was gravid?
It was a few weeks after they stopped mating. Yeah, it was wild. Like I had read about, oh, sometimes it can be hard to tell if they're ovulating, and sometimes you'll look at them and you'll be like, whoa. And she was definitely the whoa. Like I came downstairs and it looked like she had eaten a chihuahua,
Whoa.
except that the swelling was a little further downstream. But it was like night and day. It literally happened overnight. And if I hadn't been looking for it as a sign of ovulation, I would just be like, oh my God, she's going to die.
Yeah.
And that lasted maybe like 36 hours, something like that. And then it went back down just like everybody reports. In the meantime, I'm like frantically texting pictures of this to the handful of folks who were mentors, and they're like, yep, looks good.
Wow. So what happened after that? When, like, did you make the decision to separate them, or were they going to remain together? Okay. So,
Yep.
So
and
you separated
the breeding
once.
behavior had already stopped at that point.
Okay.
So, like basically once she told him that she was no longer up for breeding, he just stopped paying any attention to her and immediately went into shed. Huh. And so then I just closed off the pipe between the two of them.
Wow. And real quick, these are wild caught animals?
They were farm hatched.
Okay.
And so you never totally know what that means, or at least I don't feel like I know exactly what that means. Whether I don't know whether they were bred on the farm in Indonesia, or somebody caught a gravid female and then waited for her to lay. I don't know. Okay.
So you separated them, and then now how is their heating and lighting set up? Like, are they on, do they have like a radiant heat panel with, that's on a thermostat, and is that kind of maintaining like a constant heat in there? And then like, where did you put the lay box, or did you put multiple in there? Like, walk me through that whole process.
Sure. You want me to I'll carry this over and see if you can see.
Yeah, sure. Just make sure you use words to describe it for people that can't see the video.
Oh, yeah. Right. Exactly. Okay. So it's a little bit hard to tell because I turned off the light, so it wouldn't be a big reflection, but there's a shelf that's about halfway height-wise, a basking shelf, and that has radiant heat panels underneath it.
Okay.
And so those are just set to keep the ambient temperature, and that's consistent 24/7.
And what is that temperature?
Actually, I lied. It's not consistent. It's 78 at night and 82 during the day. And during the day, it's mostly off because the basking lights heat it up. So then here above the basking shelf, which again, there's the radiant heat panels underneath the basking shelf, and then above the basking shelf there are halogen lights. They look red because of the type of light they are, but they're not like the red, the old style reptile ones. They're a halogen reptile systems. So basically, those are heat lamps. And then those are on a separate circuit from the heat panel. You can see the Herpstat 4 up there.
Yep.
So that's controlling heat panel. It's controlling the basking lights, and it's controlling the humidity.
Okay. Okay. So that's set up on like a Mist King or something?
Yep, on a Mist King. Yep. And there's a humidity sensor back in there that keeps so it kicks on a few times a day. I keep it's got really deep substrate in there, so it's not very hard to keep the humidity up. But if the humidity does drop, then the misters will come on and bump that up.
And what's the set point for that humidity?
It varies. So it's 60 during the day and 80 at night.
Okay.
So that way it doesn't like stay damp.
Sure.
And then you can see there's a lay box back there on the floor.
Yeah.
And that's like a 17-liter Home Depot tub.
Yeah.
And then she's got a sky hide up there in the ceiling, which is where she is right now. And then there's these hanging cork tubes that go across that are, she can perch on top of them, or she squishes herself inside them as well. Scrubs, I think of scrubs as like tree hollow specialists. Yeah. So both she and the male have these giant cork tubes that they like to smush themselves in there.
And does the male have the same, like, exact identical setup as far as the radiant heat panels and the heat bulbs and all that? Okay.
Yep.
So now the big thing I want to talk about is the maternal incubation, because it terrifies me. The thought of, just kind of, potentially losing a clutch of eggs, right? Because, temperature isn't right, or whatever. Now, but you're only keeping the radiant heat panels at 78 at night, right? So that's not even that quote unquote hot, as far, I mean, at least by Florida standards, What temperature does your room actually go to? Like, what's the ambient temperature in that room that you're in right now?
Probably about 78. And while she was doing the incubation, I kept her cage a little bit warmer. I think I kept it at about 80. Okay. But she would leave the, this just to get to the heating question about MI. She would leave the clutch every day, and especially early in the incubation period, she would leave the clutch every day and go sit up on the basking shelf and heat herself up to 100 degrees. If I temp gun her, her skin temperature was 100 degrees, and she would go back in the nest box. So, wow. So I mean, for sure, like you're saying, terrifying. It was definitely terrifying at times. There were plenty of times where I was like, "Oh man, like what was I thinking?" Because totally, for sure, she's going to kill these eggs, but then I just kept going back to that thing of like, they know how to do this, and she's being super specific about her behavior, right? She's doing really specific things and doing them consistently. Yeah. And they all totally relate to caring for these eggs. So basically I decided, okay, I'm going to ride that out. And now, I mean, that was definitely everybody's concern. Like, it's going to be really hard to maintain parameters in that egg, in the lay box. But, I guess I just didn't find that to be the case. The enclosure as a whole was pretty high humidity. And then she would just go in the nest box, and, you know how it is when pythons lay eggs and they are all glued up together in a ball. Mm-hmm. So these were all glued up together in a ball about the size of a soccer ball. And she would wrap herself around these eggs 360 degrees, like the skin on an orange. And just totally tight. So it was absolutely 100% humidity in inside her coils, right? Yeah. Or I guess I shouldn't say 100% humidity, but it was totally high humidity because she's like sealed them back, and I had a camera in there and I was watching her all the time, and she wouldn't go more than about an hour or so without cracking her coils a little bit and sticking her nose down in there and checking to see how everything is. And if it got too warm, she would loosen her coils a little bit. And so she was definitely fine-tuning the thermoregulation and the humidity of that egg mass the entire time. Mm.
And so she wasn't on top of the eggs. She was actually she was kind of wrapping all around them. She was actually underneath them. And wow.
How cool is that, right?
Yeah, that's pretty wild. So how long was it until she laid, and did you have any apprehension about her becoming egg bound or anything like that Like, was that a thought? What was your game plan if that was going to happen?
I guess I would say, like, for any of this process, if you ask me, were you worried about fill in the blank? The answer is yes.
Yeah.
Right? Dude, I totally worried about everything. So the whole process, I forget how long the gestation was from when she laid, from when she laid them to when they hatched, I think was 82 days, something like that. I don't have the number in front of me, but
Sure.
low 80s.
Okay.
And from when she ovulated to when she laid, 6-ish weeks, but I would totally have to go back and look at the calendar. But I absolutely worried about her being egg bound. And I basically, my plan was like, okay, well, if that happens, I'll take pictures of her. I had an incubator set up so that if I had to pull the eggs, they would have a place to go. Although I was completely terrified about the idea of doing that.
Yeah.
Because once she laid the eggs, her personality was completely different than it was before she laid them. Right.
Yeah.
So she was way more, when people talk about snakes being defensive, I always take that with a grain of salt. Like, well, what are they, but in this case, she was definitely super defensive.
Yeah.
I only cracked the nest box lid with her sitting on the eggs twice for like 10 seconds in the entire time.
Wow.
So, but as far as the egg binding thing goes, because she was basking every day, it was super easy to see that there were no eggs in there.
Yeah.
She looked like a deflated balloon, right?
Wow. Did you offer food?
Mm-hmm. And she totally ate.
Really?
Yep.
Wow.
Yep. Oh yeah. She before she laid, she would often be like almost kind of demure when I would offer her a feeder, like I would offer her a feeder and she would come up to it and sniff it and then kind of just gently take it off of the tongs.
Yeah.
I haven't seen that Bobby since she became gravid.
Really?
So from the time she laid the eggs all the way through now, boom.
Wow.
So I kind of miss that sweet girl.
Yeah.
I don't know whether I'll get her back at any point, but
Probably not.
She's not back up to pre-lay weight yet. I'm not in a rush to do that. I'm not going to be breeding her again anytime soon or anything like that. So,
Sure.
But she's steadily putting weight back on.
And how did you fit the camera inside the lay box? Like, it doesn't look like it's that big of a box.
Those Wise cams have a little hole in the mounting base, and I just drilled a hole through the lay box and zip tied it in place.
Oh,
okay. It was nice too because those cameras give off heat, so I had the Govee sensor in the nest box,
mm-hmm.
and it was connected to a smart plug that powered the camera. And so if the nest box got too hot, the camera would shut off and the temperature would drop back down. It usually took maybe a half hour or so. And then the camera would kick back on. So the camera actually became sort of an auxiliary little micro heater, but you don't need a very big heater in a 17 liter tub.
Yeah. How many, or what was the temperature rather? What was the set point to have that turn off? Well, like what would it get up to?
I would have it turn off if it got to, I think 85 and a half.
Okay.
Kind of on the low side for what a lot of people incubate at.
Yeah. Did you record a lot of that footage while she was in there? I mean, like what kind of, and did you observe anything that was really interesting that sets out in your mind?
Well, the thing of like just how diligent she was, I mean, when I think about like she sat in the dark for 3 months with these eggs, never going more than a couple hours without checking them,
Mm.
like 24/7 for 3 months. And she, I mean, just like that attentiveness and that dedication, just blew my mind. That's where it started to feel like, oh, okay, this isn't just like an interesting scientific observation. I actually found it like I felt like gratitude to be able to watch this profound behavior, right? I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know how else to put it. I just thought it was so cool. And then there were just other things, like when she would come back in the nest and she'd wrap herself all around the eggs. The egg mass totally rotated.
Oh, wow.
So I mean, there's that whole thing about that people get very concerned about rotating eggs.
Yeah.
Like, you mark them and you put them in the incubator and you mark the top of them so you don't rotate them, because if you rotate them, they're going to die. No,
Doesn't matter.
I mean, like, I had pictures every day of when she left the nest, and okay, today the eggs are like this. The
Yeah.
next day they're like this. The next day they're like that.
Oh, wow.
And just completely different every day. It was really easy to see because they were asymmetrical, how they were all glued together, so you could see where they were. So that was a nice sort of myth buster.
Yeah.
Kind of thing.
Yeah, I've heard that brought up recently on a couple podcasts that it's like not a thing, but a lot of people are having a hard time letting go of their habits, of making sure that they don't rotate the eggs and all that.
Mm-hmm. Yep. I mean, I totally get it. I feel like breeders, you don't know what you don't know, and people haven't been breeding snakes for all that long, and so people try and isolate different variables, and so if you put eggs in an incubator and you didn't rotate them, it's easy to say, oh, okay, the eggs did well because I didn't rotate them.
Yeah.
And all it takes is, one person one time having a clutch not go well, and no, I didn't pay attention to not rotating the eggs, and people are going to be like, oh yeah, that's totally, that's how it is. If you rotate the eggs, they're going to die. So
yeah, that's I mean, I was just talking with William Philippek about breeding animals that you love, and like my Argentine boa comes to mind there because of her personality and all that, and I want to breed her, but at the same time I'm like, man, what if something goes wrong? What if something goes wrong, or what if it changes her? Because he and I talked about that as well. That that it can change them, and he was saying that he has animals that once he took the eggs away from the female, that it was like they never forgot that,
Yep.
and like they started they just hated him from that point on.
Really?
Yeah. So it's it's something that. Something to think about, but we were talking about just kind of behavior in general and how moving them from one room to another could change the way that they feed, and taking away the eggs and then having an animal that could have been easy to handle previously and is now very defensive and kind of, almost seems like it's holding a grudge, And I mean, if you think about it, what would a predator do? It would come in and take the eggs, and take the thing that's not going to put a fight up, so then are they viewing you as a predator, something that came in and
Totally.
she doesn't know what happened to her eggs. You just came in and yoinked them away, and, in her mind, you went and ate them in the corner,
Well, yeah. I mean, you think about, like, how long does it take for a lot of snakes to not be terrified of people?
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter if it's a big snake or a little snake, right? So you spend years socializing a snake, getting it to the point where it trusts you, for lack of a better term, and then you do something like that.
Yeah.
Like, I hadn't thought about it in quite that way, but it makes sense to me.
Yeah. Yeah. I had never thought about that or heard that before, and, we've all seen the videos of guys, taking the animal off of the eggs. And it seems like some are very agreeable to it. Like,
Hmm.
I don't, yeah, go ahead and take me off, palpate, make sure I don't have any left behind, and, we're good to go. And then,
Yep.
you see other ones where it's, they're pretty defensive about it,
Oh yeah, for sure. For sure.
If you had like what did you have going through your mind as far as what would have been a trigger to take the eggs away from her?
If she had just like abandoned them, like when she left the lay box, whatever it was, 12 hours after laying them, I think, something like that.
Uh-huh. Was that a red flag?
Yeah, I mean, I was like, oh my God, she's abandoning the nest.
Yeah.
And, again, my friends talk me down.
Yeah.
I know I talked about this on another podcast, but one friend of mine in particular, she just texted me exactly what I needed to hear. And she just wrote, there's still time to trust her. And,
Yeah.
and that just really stuck with me. And that was my mantra for the entire time. But yeah, I mean, if she had gone off them and not gone back to them, for sure, I would have pulled them.
Yeah.
Or if she had been in some sort of obvious, like if she had, like real egg binding, like you sometimes see where a snake has got like three or four of them that are just sort of all jammed up. Then I would have pulled. It wouldn't have been that I was pulling the eggs. I would have been pulling her,
Sure.
right? So
And then the eggs.
yeah, yeah. I mean, that would have been, yeah, exactly, exactly. But it would have been for her benefit. Um,
Yeah. Now, so after they started to hatch, well, first of all, like, and if you don't have exact numbers, that's fine. I know, it's some time has elapsed, but how many eggs were there in total?
mhm.
Slugs, how many hatched out? What were all those numbers like?
So there were 15 eggs, which is, I think, fairly standard for scrubs. Maybe a slightly large clutch for a first one, but not unusual. There was one that looked a little bit weird, and and I was always worried about it, but there was no way to separate it without, again, pulling the entire clutch and getting her off of them and so forth. And it didn't seem to be messing with the other ones. The ones that were adjacent and glued up to it seemed to be doing just fine. So I figured, okay, well, if that one might not live, but it doesn't seem to be hurting anything else, so I'm just going to leave it there.
Yeah.
Um, and then and so there were zero slugs. Everybody hatched.
Wow.
There was one baby that had severe defects. I
Mm.
sort of assume it was from that egg, but I don't know for sure.
Wow.
And that one didn't survive.
What kind of defects are we talking about?
Oh, it was sad. So it had spinal kinks, and then it had its belly just wasn't right. It didn't knit. It
Mm.
wasn't. The there's a seam that is supposed to close up and knit, and it was like loose,
Ugh.
and so and then that whole middle part of its belly just wasn't formed properly.
Mm.
So and it only had one eye. I didn't care about the eye, but
Yeah.
and that little guy, that guy stayed in the nest after everybody else. All of the other ones left, but that one tried to get out and it wasn't able to, and she stayed with it for probably a day or so after everybody else left,
Mm.
and and then she had to leave as well. So
Mm.
that was sad.
Yeah. So how long did they stay in the nest altogether?
Um, they started leaving after about 2.5 days, and all but Lefty. We called him Lefty because he only had a right eye.
Yeah.
So all but Lefty were gone in like, I think 70, 71 hours, something like that. But during that time, she managed them really intensively. She controlled what they did a lot. And
how so?
She wouldn't let them out of the eggs like they would. So once they started pipping, she mostly loosened her coils, and she was like around the outside edge of the nest mass, or the egg mass rather. So she'd be like up against the borders of the plastic box, and they would, sort of, they'd be sticking their heads out of the eggs, and if they got more than, I don't know, a couple inches out and they came into any contact with her, she would just like whack. And it was wild. When I first saw her doing it, I'm like, oh no, another one of those, oh no, she's going to kill the babies thing.
Yeah.
That was the theme throughout the whole time. But
what do you think that was? Why do you think she was doing that?
Different people have different theories about it. It makes sense to me that she was maybe making sure that they stayed in there long enough that they were really absorbing all of the yolk. Because they came out, they were sturdy little guys. It could also be a thing of she didn't let any of them out until everybody had fully pipped and kind of like gotten to know each other, I guess would be another way of looking at it. And they were all sort of all slimed together with the same albumin from their eggs. And so everybody, I don't know how much of it has to do with them, with the socialization thing because they really, as I've been raising the babies, they're cohab to some degree, and they hang out together all the time. So it makes me wonder how much of that is like basically an imprinting thing so that they know who their siblings are. It could also just be building a resilience thing, like, hey, the world is a tough place and you should be afraid of things. So, as you come out of the egg, bam, you need to be watching.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Interesting. When I was talking to Rich Crowley, he said he puts all of his short-tail pythons together to tame them down. Because when they all go together, they're like little springs waiting to go off. And one will bite one, and then the other will bite, and the other will bite, and it starts this chain reaction where they all start biting each other.
Really?
And he said that within a few days, they all realize we shouldn't do this anymore. And they stop biting because the one that initiates that whatever you want to call it, bite off, right, realizes that I'm not going to do this anymore because it just leads to everybody biting each other. And so I can't remember how long he said he puts them together, but that's his like socialization tool to get them started and to curb that desire to bite. Is that, hey, if you want to bite, that's fine, but one of your clutch mates is probably going to give it right back to you, and then it's just going to go down the line.
Wow. And those are babies that were hatched in an incubator.
Yes. Yep.
That's so interesting. I mean, I know scrubs and shorttails are pretty different, right?
Yeah, they're both snakes,
but they're all pythons. They're sort of the opposite ends of the python spectrum.
Yeah, it's the short-tail python and the long-tail python.
Yeah. But no, that's super interesting. I mean, I feel like the behavior of hatchlings and neonates in wild snakes, other than some of the viviparous ones like rattlesnakes and stuff, for the most part, it's like basically never been observed, right? And
yeah.
And
did you watch The Python Queen? I think it's called. Or
no, what's that?
There is a documentary. I forgot where it is. If it's on, it's either on Apple or Peacock or something. I need to like post it up again. I posted it up a few months ago because I was sitting there. I watched it with the whole family. I think it was done by Smithsonian, but it's an African rock python. And
Oh, yeah.
yeah, they follow her through the entire process of
Yep.
breeding to incubating to having the babies. And then like their observation is that she hangs out with the babies for a while, right? And
Yep.
yeah, that was absolutely like, in my opinion, that could be like the best snake documentary ever made because it's just
Yep.
like it's so good and there's nothing sensational. There's no trash in it. It's just
Totally.
factual and following the animal. I wish that there was more like that, more snake documentaries or programs out there like that.
Absolutely. Yeah, totally. That's so,
But
I mean, that's so cool and so interesting, right? Um, I mean, I feel like we're just scratching the surface with learning about the social lives of reptiles,
yeah.
you know, um, both scientifically and as a hobby. Um,
Yeah, and I another thing, there was another one that we saw as a family, and I need to go back and watch the African rock python one again because it was so good. I need to watch it again. But there was another one on anacondas, and like they showed multiple different kinds of boas in the same area. I think throughout the documentary, and a lot of them just look like gross. Like they're like they've got like a patch of shed skin on them, and like the anaconda's got like this loose, nasty mouth with like mucus, so maybe it had some sort of an infection, and and I think that anaconda ended up dying. I hope I'm not like conflating or putting a bunch of documentaries together in my head, which I might be. But it was kind of interesting that like we think about these animals as being sort of pristine and clean and just a perfect shed every time and all that, and you think about your animals in your collection and you want them to have a perfect shed every single time and you want them to look perfect and all this, but that's not necessarily the way that nature is, and these animals in the wild, probably if you went out and got one, it's not going to look like an animal from your collection. It's going to have ticks and mites and all that. Oh, a segue right into mites.
well done. I didn't even see that coming.
Neither did I. But we're not ready yet anyway. We'll get to that. But because I want to talk about the babies and getting them started, because I know that's been an ongoing process, right?
Yep.
So how old are the babies now? And do you still have all 14 of them in your
I
care?
do. Yep.
Okay, so you still have
They're
all
not in one
14.
cage. There's spread between three different cages. So they're 5, 5, and 4.
Okay.
Um,
And what size cages are they in?
I've got 2 4x2x2s, and they each have 5, and then I've got a 36-inch Exoterra that has 4.
Okay. So once these guys are all reared and they find their forever homes, and I wish I wasn't in Florida so I could have one, but once they all have their forever homes, do you plan on breeding again?
I don't know. I have kind of mixed feelings about it. And it's nice that I don't have to make a decision anytime soon. Like in this case, they're all just going to friends and family, basically. I'm not charging for them. I'm just asking people to make donations to a couple of charities.
Man, I really wish I wasn't in Florida.
I mean, I really want people to spend the money on really good husbandry for them.
That's awesome.
Like that's more important to me than getting a few $100 for it. Knowing, I mean, it's another one of those things about work, like going back to that theme of what do you worry about? I worry a lot about what kind of lives the animals that I am responsible for producing. I worry a lot about what kind of lives they're going to have. So I have really mixed feelings about about just an arm's length transaction of selling them to somebody on Morph Market or whatever. And that's not throwing shade on anybody else who does that. That's just how that is for me. So yeah, I would really be stressed about that. And I also kind of want to just see, like, right now, these babies are all super chill, except for one of them. But the rest of them are all super chill. Like, if I open up the cage door, they're just going to come crawling out and just crawl right onto my hand. And I want to see, like, does that personality persist? I mean, one of the reasons that pushed me towards breeding these guys in the first place is that they, as scrubs go, they have actually really calm temperaments. And I think if people are going to be keeping scrubs in captivity, it's better for the keeper and it's better for the animal if you have ones that are calm. If you have ones that are just completely stressed out by being in captivity and they're striking at the glass all the time, that's like a lose-lose, right? Yeah. So my goal with breeding these was to produce chill animals that are well suited for captivity. But I don't feel like I'm really going to know whether they are that for a while, right?
That's really interesting that they're all like super chill. It makes me super excited to breed my Timors one day, successfully, hopefully, because I like that. That's like something I want so bad, is for people to have pet Timors, and like they have a pretty bad rap. Mine don't bite me. So that's like a step in the right direction, Right. If I could get them to stop exploding urates and musk on me, that would be fantastic, and it all boils down to consistent holding, on my part and handling and doing it in the least stressful way possible. Unfortunately, like, choice-based handling is not a thing with them, because they will never make the choice to come anywhere near an open enclosure door. Really? Ever. Yeah, it's not going to happen, and so what I usually have to do is just kind of, I'll go in there and I'll give them a couple strokes to let them know that I'm there, and then do a confident kind of scoop up and out of the enclosure as fast as possible. If they're near the enclosure and they feel like they can get into it, then that's when they do their fluid dump. And
wow.
Yeah, so it's like, and it's bananas, because like once they're out, they're totally fine. It's difficult.
And how old were they when you got them?
So the one male, Philip Timor Hoffman, he is 2.5, I want to say. He's a 22, and then the other two are 23s. And I got the pair directly from Ryan, and then I got the male from a pet shop that happened to get a Timor on trade, and it happened to be one of Ryan's.
Okay.
So that was just kind of lucky that I lucked out and, found another one. Mm-hmm. And luckily Ryan keeps really good records, so we were able to match up the head scalation.
That's great. I'd be so interested to know what babies would be like for Timors if they were, I mean, I don't really know anything about Timors really, but if they were kept differently, like, the whole thing of, like, if you're keeping a hatchling in a by itself in a hatchling rack that's opaque and all of that, even if you open up the drawer every single day, which I would imagine a lot of people don't do, it's only going to be open for a couple of minutes, right? I mean, they have almost no socialization. And then if they're another species that does well with cohabbing as babies, and that's going to influence their feeling of security. So you're not providing them that if you're keeping them in a hatchling rack either. Housed individually. like these guys from, well, I mean, they were never, once they were out of the nest box, every minute of their lives, if they wanted to see a person, they could see a person. So there's, there's just like way, way, way more passive habituation that goes on with that.
Yeah.
And then I've made a point of having my hands in each of those cages every day, which they made it easy to do, like I said, because they all came out really chill, except for that one that I keep mentioning.
So what's that one's deal? Is does it bite? Does it flee? Like what's its attitude like?
I think he's a friend of mine was joking, like, yeah, if these guys were in the wild, he's the only one that would have a chance of survival. He's really good at being a scrub. The other ones are terrible. The other ones are just, bird food.
Yeah.
And I'm saying I don't know if he's a he or not. But he, he's bitey. So like if I go to pick him up, he's totally going to bite me. Multiple times. And he will come out of the cage, but he's going to do it a lot slower than everybody else. So he's more deliberate about his choices, but at the same time, he was the first one to eat. He was the first one to transition from quail to mice. So
that's usually how it is. That's like, usually the snappy ones are the best eaters.
Yep. So it's going to be really interesting. My friend who's taking him he's like a fantastic keeper, and his agenda for him is like, if he doesn't want to be handled, he doesn't have to be handled.
Yeah.
And so I'm super curious to see how his personality develops over time compared to all the rest of these.
Yeah. So it's 14 altogether, right? And and one that's a little shithead, but but it's fine.
It's totally fine.
Yeah. And that's kind of how I view the Timors too. Like if they're not about it, that's fine, but there is a certain level of work that I have to put in with them. Otherwise it's just going to make my life really difficult as they get larger, I hear about the interactions that, some people have and how difficult it can be, trying to handle a 8-9 foot snake that doesn't appreciate being handled. It's like, ugh,
Oh yeah, totally.
So how have they all taken, quail off tongs?
No. So there's 2 that haven't eaten voluntarily yet, and I've been tube feeding them. I tried doing assist feeding, and I just couldn't get them to cooperate. They're pretty strong, and they're just. I tried it with mice. I tried it with quail, and those guys, they just spit it out.
Wow.
So I've been doing tube feeding with the carnivore critical care stuff, which I was really intimidated about doing at the beginning, but you get used to it. And
can you walk me through that process of tube feeding, and then
sure.
what is it that you're giving them? Because I'm not familiar with it.
Okay, so it's a powdered. It's called critical care carnivore, or carnivore critical care, or something like that. But basically, it's just protein powder, and you mix it up to a consistency sort of like latex paint, and you put it in a syringe with a red rubber catheter tube, and you lube it up, and you gently get it down their throat. Maybe it probably goes in like 10 inches or so, something like that.
Holy shit.
Yeah. I had the vet do it the first time, which also goes back to the Mite thing. And I was like, oh my God, this is hard to watch. But I thought to myself, like, there is no way in hell I would ever do that. And, now I'm doing it regularly.
How often do you have to do it?
I do it about every 10 days.
Okay.
There was another one who wasn't eating, and it's now started eating on its own. And the two that I'm tube feeding are starting to show more interest in feeders when I put them in the cage. But they, and they sniff them and they move them around with their nose, but they just haven't been willing to take one yet.
And that's with quail. Are you sticking with the quail to try to get them going?
I've offered quail and mice, both live and frozen thawed.
Wow. Geez, that must be hard to source live baby quail.
I have a friend who lives by here who breeds button quail.
Oh, that's incredibly fortunate.
It is. Oh, dude, if I didn't have her, holy smokes. Because I could get live quail from her that weighed 4 grams.
Wow.
Which, I mean, that was a godsend. I didn't really appreciate going into this how important that would be. But if I had it to do over again and I didn't have that source, I would even consider getting some of those quail.
Yeah.
Because that was what most of them started on.
The button quail, they all have to be incubated, right? Like they don't lay on their own eggs, right? Don't they like just dump the egg and run?
I don't know.
I think I had heard that because I might even have talked to somebody about it on the podcast that breeds quail, because they're like so domesticated that they just don't have that function anymore. Like they don't lay their eggs and sit on them. They're like, there's the egg, I'll see ya, and they go about their day. But I don't know. Ask your friend for me, because I'm curious about that.
Yeah. I would think that, I mean, I think you could do it in a pretty small area. The big thing is that they smell.
Yeah. Damn birds. So hopefully so how does that work with the tube feeding? You get to like day 9 or 10, and then you're like, all right, time to offer and see if they're ready. Have you thought about sweating them out longer and pushing it to 2 or 3 weeks? Or are you concerned about their body weight? Are they putting on a lot of weight with the tube feeding?
No, they're maintaining.
Okay.
So
where are they in regards to the others, to the other ones that are feeding?
So they all hatched out between like 50 and 54 grams. And then I think the first one who ate, it was almost a month after hatching that the first one ate. And they all lost weight during that time,
sure.
which I would assume is probably, I mean, they were aquatic beings, right? So their water balance is going to change.
Sure.
So the ones that have been eating, some of them are back up to body weight and some of them are over 60 grams now, the biggest ones. But these ones that are being tube fed are still down around 42. So they got really skinny. And to the point where I was worried about them surviving. And that's where I guess I'm inconsistent, because before I was like, well, okay, I'm doing the maternal incubation and all of that stuff. And, if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. And I just have to be okay with that. But I'm taking a different philosophical approach with this.
You're like, all right, well, time to use science and jab this thing down 10 inches into its gut. Oh man. Well, I best of luck. I hope that they take to it, and start eating and stop being stupid.
It seems like it's again, they're not outside the bell curve of what's common for captive hatch scrubs.
Yeah.
So I know some of that have gone, I think, like 7 or 8 months without eating.
Oh, jeez. Man. All right. So now we'll just ungracefully change lanes over to mites. Your collection right now is free of mites, correct?
As far as I know, yep.
But you've dealt with a mite infestation, right? So let's get into that. When did it start? Did it affect any of the babies? And then I want to get into the treatment, because your treatment is a very different treatment compared to what most people use to treat mites. So that's why I want to talk about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I guess at first I was really embarrassed about it. Like when I realized I was embarrassed, I felt like like I'd gotten diagnosed with an STD, like,
Sure.
which,
It's almost worse.
well, and literally I had to walk myself through that process. I'm like, you shouldn't even really be embarrassed about an STD, depending on how you get it, I guess. But maybe I'm taking that metaphor a little too far. But it's like, it's a fact of life, right? That mites they're everywhere, and for a lot of people, it's a question of when, not if.
Yeah.
So
Just like STDs.
Yeah. So I've heard.
We'll keep drawing back to that.
I think that the scrub adults that came to me with mites.
Okay.
I never saw any on them, but they came to me with they like to soak. So, and I just figured, okay, well, some snakes like to soak, and I reached out to the seller, and I said, hey, is this a concern? Do you think that they could have mites? And he was like, I don't think they do, and I treat prophylactically with NexGard, but for sure, part of good quarantine is you should be treating too, and just because I don't think they don't have mites, or just because I don't think they have mites, doesn't mean they don't have mites, and you should just that's on everybody when they get their own snakes, is to do their own treatment and their own assessment.
And so how far into having them was this?
Well, they were soaking like as soon as I got them.
Okay. And when did that question go through your mind of like, uh-oh?
Like right away, like
Okay.
within a couple of days of having them.
And then when did you actually see the first mite?
Not until she was sitting on eggs.
Oh my God. How long was that?
So she was sitting on eggs like 5 or 6 months after I got them.
Oh, wow.
So basically, they soak to drown the mites, right?
Sure.
And I would see them I gave them these big water tubs because, okay, you guys like to soak. I gave them a tub that was big enough for both of them to soak together. And I have all these pictures where their entire bodies are underwater except the two little noses sticking out. And they're all wrapped up together in the same water tub. And like I said, I never saw a single mite, and I didn't have anything spreading to any of my other snakes either. But once she was in her lay box, she wasn't soaking anymore, right? In fact, I took away her soaking tub because I wanted to encourage her to spend time in the lay box and not be soaking all the damn time.
Yeah.
And once that happened, she went in this warm, extremely humid box and couldn't soak anymore. And so her mite population just exploded. And I didn't realize what was going on until about a week after the eggs had been laid. And then I felt like the worst keeper in the world, because I was looking at her, and you could see on the camera like hundreds of mites crawling all over her.
You could see them on the camera?
Yeah.
How big are they?
They're teeny tiny.
Oh man. There was just so many of them you could see them. Wow.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, they're the size of like a pinhead.
Yeah.
And I mean, like, I can't even tell you how bad I felt. And then, because now all of a sudden there's this like giant population, instead of just being like a handful of them probably on each of the snakes, now all of a sudden there's 1 billion of them in the cage. And now all of my other snakes start soaking. I'm just like, fuck. As you can imagine.
Yeah.
So, and at that point, I wasn't going to do any kind of topical treatment because she's sitting on eggs, right? So I wasn't going to like dump chicken powder in there or something. Because I didn't know what would happen to the, what it would do to the eggs. So fortunately I had heard about, there were these scientists in Italy who did a test of NexGard, the heartworm medication for dogs and cats. They had, or not. I'm sorry, not heartworm. It's for fleas and ticks. Yeah. So basically, if it kills fleas and ticks, the reasoning went, okay, well, it will kill these mites as well. And so they did a test of giving snakes NexGard, and like 80 out of 80 snakes, it killed all the ticks. And so I wrote to those guys in Italy, and they were really gracious, and talked to them about dosing and how to do the dosing, and so forth. And my vet was really, really, really reticent to do it. She didn't want to do it. We actually kind of had it out in the lobby, and then they fired me after that. They told me I wasn't welcome to come back because I got mad. But they did give me the prescription for the NexGard, and with the adult snakes, it was really easy. And thank God Bobby was eating. Yeah. So you just you weigh the pills out and you cut them. There's a proportion of how much medication per kilogram of snake, and slip it under the skin of the feeder and just give the feeder to the snake. And I thought that took care of it with all 4 of the adult snakes that I had at that point. And within a couple of days, you couldn't see any of them visible in the nest box anymore. As it turns out, they were only mostly dead. Princess Bride quote there. And after the babies hatched, and I put the babies in their own cages, they were fine. And then after a week, all of the babies started soaking, and I was just, no, oh my God, no. And so the babies, as it turns out, there was still an infestation in the nest box, and the babies took it with them. And so then I had to take them to the vet, my new vet, and he was great. He was like, yeah, okay, yeah, no, I'm totally aware of this treatment. It's been tested, and as long as you sign a waiver that acknowledges we're using this medication off-label, fine. And so they did the thing of mixing up that carnivore critical care that I was talking about, and I had to go to a compounding pharmacy to get the NexGard made into a liquid, because the pills I would have had to have weighed out like 1/100th of a pill.
Oh my gosh!
And you can't guarantee that the pill is going to be adequately distributed, or the medication is going to be adequately distributed throughout the pill. It's possible that you could cut off, shave off 1/100th of a pill and it has no medication in it at all.
Sure.
So the compounding pharmacy made the medicine for me. I took that to the vet. They added that to the critical care and tube fed all 14 of them. And again, within a couple of days, they stopped soaking, and no more mites.
Wow. So it's like a one and done treatment. You don't have to, or what are you doing as far as your substrate and everything? Are you pulling all that and replacing it? You're just, okay. So you're treating the animals and ending the cycle there. So that way, whatever mites hatch out over the course of the next 30, 60 days, whatever, they can go ahead and try to feed, but they're going to feed and die, and it'll stop the life cycle.
Yeah, because they have to feed in order to get that meal, which will then nourish the mite eggs. Mm-hmm. So they eat before they lay eggs, and just like you said, as soon as they eat, they die. So, but it turns out one of the takeaways from that whole experience is that mites have a longer life cycle than is often talked about in the hobby. And I talked with another researcher, a guy who's studying snake mites in particular. That's his area of focus. And I wrote to him, I'm like, okay, what is the life cycle? Because you read about like 30 days, 45 days. He's like 60 to 90.
Wow.
So
did you have to treat multiple times over that 60 to 90 days?
No,
Or?
because the NexGard is persistent enough in their system that if you treat them once and they don't get reinfected, then they're going to be okay. So once the babies showed signs of an active infestation, I figured, okay, I'm going to just prophylactically treat my 4 adults just to make sure that there's no reservoir of a snake that a mite could feed on. I'm going to make sure
you end up chasing your tail where, okay, exactly. Now I got to treat the adults and now I got to, just go back and forth.
Yep.
Wow. And don't they can reproduce asexually, correct? Parthenogenesis, mites.
The mites?
Yeah, I've heard that. I think I
don't recall reading that.
I think Warren Booth told me that. Cuz I mean like
that's interesting.
Yeah, so like you could end up taking one mite home, from a reptile show, and that little son of a bitch could go and, infect your entire collection.
It's crazy like reptile shows. When I like going to them. I like meeting other people and hanging out in the social aspect. And when I first started going to them as a new keeper, I was like, oh, can I hold the snake? Can I hold the snake? Because, who doesn't like holding snakes, right? But I don't do that at all anymore.
Yeah.
Like,
and it's like, keep your snake away from me.
Yeah. If I were selling snakes, like, again, I'm not throwing shade on people who have a different business practice, but there's no way I would be just letting people come up and handle them.
Yeah, no, I could never do it. I will never do it. I will never have a table set up with my animals on it just because I don't want to deal with the hassle.
Totally.
It's too much of a hassle. I mean, talk to William Philippek about that. I mean, he's a giant germaphobe, and yeah, he preventamites his tablecloths and everything because he's.
Oh yeah, I would.
Yeah, it's terrifying. But when you're a breeder on his level, like you kind of have to do it. Like you can't rely on just like, oh yeah, I have a clutch and people are interested in it, and it's people I know and they're vetted and all that. He's got a lot of animals and he's got to be able to move those to different people that he wouldn't meet otherwise.
Yep.
So yeah,
kudos to him for doing a good job then, right? Because like it's one thing to just decide like, oh, I'm going to sell a bunch of snakes and then just lower your standards or not have high standards to begin with. But if you're producing like that and you maintain a high standard of biosecurity and so forth, hats off to him. That's great.
Oh yeah, he and I talk a lot, and he sent me pictures of like the biohazard mats that like you walk on, and it like treats the bottom of your shoes and everything. Because I've told him that when I get home from shows with my family, like my kids, it's immediately your clothes are off in the washing machine, and I'm throwing like 2 soap packets in there and a little bit of bleach, and shoes stay out in the garage. And you're going to the shower and you're scrubbing everything down, and that goes for everybody. It's there's no exceptions to that rule. But
yeah, I mean, like you should probably wear rubber boots, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think people think I'm crazy enough as it is because I walk around the shows handing out cards. Check out my reptile podcast. Some people say, oh, neat. And other ones just stare at me like I'm a psycho. Like I'm some homeless dude handing out business cards. But yeah, it's rough. It's the shows are rough. It's it is fun to go to them, and at the same time it's like, don't touch me, stay away.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well that's definitely something I want to keep in my back pocket, as a treatment, is the NexGard, because that's kind of a outside the box thing. And I mean, dang, if I had to replace all my substrate in one shot, it would probably be like $900 worth of substrate.
Yeah, and I mean, like think about all of the impacts of that. It's super expensive. It's a shit ton of work. It's super disruptive for all of your animals.
Yeah.
And you don't even know for sure if you did it right.
Yeah.
Right. Like, I mean, at this point, if I had a new snake coming into my collection, I I mean, I would automatically treat everybody with NexGard. Because like they've observed zero side effects, and it seems to do just a fantastic job. So
yeah, my quarantine is they go into a tub that's been preventamited,
Yep.
so I take it outside and I spray the whole thing down and keep them on paper towels, and every time they have a bowel movement, I'm able to look at it
Sure.
closely and all that. The bummer part of it is that the clock resets every time a new animal comes in. So,
Yep.
I've got a poor ball python that's in that rack since August. And every time somebody new comes in, he's probably like, no, curse you.
Yeah.
But yeah, hopefully that'll be ending here pretty soon. A few more weeks and they can all get out of there. So how long did you say the life cycle was? 90 days?
He said 60 to 90.
60 to 90. Ugh. Yeah, that's terrible. Man.
Yep.
Ugh.
Yeah, I mean, they're successful and widespread for a reason, right? I
Yeah.
mean, they're really, really good at what they do.
Yeah, yeah. Man. So I know we're about to wrap up here. What's exciting to you right now in keeping? Any scientific papers that come to mind? Anything that is getting you going and keeping you interested and excited about the hobby?
Well, like that ball python sociability study that just came out a couple of weeks ago. I thought that was awesome.
You want to give us a rundown of that?
Yeah. So basically, what they were talking about on that paper was that they were observing. I think they were juveniles, but that the ball pythons more often than not chose to hang out together when they had an option, and so just, I mean, that doesn't say to me like, oh, okay, we should all be cohabiting all of our snakes all the time. I mean, I think it's way more nuanced than that. But
Yeah.
But just the idea that there's a lot of interest, both in the hobby and academically, in seeing these animals for more complex than they've been thought of as being in the past. I mean, we're going to do we're in the process of writing a paper on the maternal care that we observed with the scrubs.
That's awesome.
And because it's never been documented, like just the idea that it's really easy to think of these guys as simple animals, or I don't even really know what that means, but that we think of them as like, what's the opposite of anthropomorphizing something is mechanomorphizing it. Thinking of them as just being like little machines, simple little machines, and they're obviously a lot more than that, behaviorally, cognitively, socially, all of that. And so I'm just really excited that there's lots of people now who are looking at that from all different vantage points. And, just thinking about like that thing of the little short-tailed bite off, right? That's amazing. I love that. That's super, super interesting. So the fact that people are interested in that and people are sharing it, like, it's not a taboo thing for people to be talking about it. I mean, I know you get pushback from some like super old school folks, but not all of them by a long shot. And lots of the newer folks who are coming into it are just sort of picking that up and running with it. So I think that's great.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you see like a lot of the people that keep lizards and everything are, they show how much of a connection that they have with these larger lizards, whether it be a monitor or an iguana. But yeah, and I think that I know I've said this multiple times on different episodes, but it's so important that we we stick together as hobbyists, and just kind of accept that we're all going to do things differently to one extent or another. But that, man, like with like this new documentary that's being worked on and everything, like, God dang, we got to be united as keepers, because they are going to be coming for us, and it's not going to be pretty. And if we're together on a lot of this stuff and just accept each other for the way that we are, right, and that to not say that, oh yeah, bioactive is stupid, and people keeping this way is stupid, and all that. Like, we just have to say, like, hey, we keep reptiles, and that's the important thing, right? And that as long as we're doing that humanely, who cares if somebody thinks that their snake has human emotions? It's not affecting you.
Yeah.
Maybe you'll be able to sell a snake to that person. So,
well, I mean, I think that's why your podcast is doing so well, right? Because you keep that, you're coming from that perspective, and you're really consistent with, you've got an open mind, and you're talking to people who hopefully have open minds. And, you're having those thoughtful, reflective conversations. And I mean, I think that's why you're being successful, right? Like, there's a real hunger for that in the community. So
yeah, it's
I'm very happy that you're doing it.
Yeah, I'm doing the best I can, and I don't know what to do when anybody says anything positive, so I'm just gonna
just blush and take it
in. It's somebody messaged me this morning and said something positive about it, what I'm doing here, and I told them, I said I'm very surprised by how welcoming and kind everybody has been, in the hobby, and what I was doing was kind of selfish, where I just wanted to learn and be able to talk to people without being told that there's some pinned document that I can go and reference, in regards to any of these questions. Cause that's often what you get with some pages, where you'll ask a set of questions and they'll say, hey, go to the pinned document. Did you read that? Well, yeah, I read it, but I have a question about this specific thing. And I happen to know for a fact that if you ask 7 people, they're all going to do it differently. And I don't think that the pinned document is the way to do it. I want to get multiple opinions. And that, so that's why I love asking all these, cool people that I have had on, all these different questions, and what am I going to do when I do have a python that's going to lay eggs? Am I going to do maternal incubation, or am I going to just freak out and put everything in the incubator? It's probably going to be the latter, because I'm too afraid.
Oh, don't be afraid. Like, what are snakes? How do I put it? Okay. Do you know the YouTube channel Z Frank?
No.
Oh, okay, dude. I'm going to send you a link to that. It's one of my favorite shows. And it's silly but serious science lessons about different animals. And his most recent one is stingrays.
Mm-hmm.
And he's talking about how amazing they are at hiding. And they can burrow down in the sand and everything. And he's like, yeah, this is what happens when you play hide and seek to the death for 300 million years. So, but I think that's how I was thinking about the maternal incubation thing. Like, they have a super, super, super strong selection pressure to be able to do this right.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, there's almost nothing that is a stronger selection pressure on them than than to be able to do this right, because you've got 300 million years of maternal lineage going back from Bobby, and every single one of those moms for 300 million years did maternal incubation.
Well, I guess my biggest concern is not what the animal will do wrong, what I will do wrong, or what equipment I'll have will fail. And I understand an incubator can fail. Trust me,
Yep.
I get that,
Yep.
So yeah, I don't know. That's going to be something I'm going to grapple with, I know, for quite a while. And I definitely want to talk to more people about it. I guarantee you though, I promise I will maternally incubate with my boas. I promise I will. I'm going to let my boas do it.
That's good. Yes.
I'm not going to cut anything. I'm going to just let the mother handle it.
Yeah, definitely do not be cutting those boa heads.
Oh man. All right. Well, thanks for coming on, Paul. I know you got
It's great to see you as always.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. And thank you for being a Patreon member. I really appreciate that. And
join Adam's Patreon, you guys.
Oh, thanks, buddy.
No, seriously, do it. Like, it's, for one thing, we should support people who are putting out content like this. And if you're still listening to this, you are a hardcore fan. And at the end of an hour and a half talking about this, right? So you should just be kicking him a few bucks a month to even just cover his costs, right? And plus, it's just the nice thing to do.
Thanks, Paul. I appreciate that. You're the OG, the original Patreon. So I appreciate it.
You bet.